It goes out for the single mothers that got kids. Now, what can we do? We can't to feed our kids, let alone if we do have jobs. Again, what can we do? Because that was helping us.
As if you are someone who lives on every dollar of food assistance, then after the shock of November, with notices about frozen payments, half payments, and then late makeup deposits, your question now is very concrete. In December 2025, will SNAP food stamps still be as shaky as they just were? Or will they finally return to a stable payment rhythm so your family can plan meals again? The key to answering that question does not lie in everything that happened over the whole year, but in two very recent milestones: the Continuing Appropriations, Agriculture, Legislative Branch, Military Construction, and Veterans Affairs and Extensions Act 2026, which Congress passed and the President signed on November 12, 2025, and the SNAP Benefit Issuance Memorandum issued immediately afterward by USDA's Food and Nutrition Service, FNS, on November 13. Before those two dates, the guidance from October 10, October 24, and November 4, 5, 7, and 8 put states into a reduced obligations, wait for the courts, wait for funding mode. After those two dates, the legal picture shifted completely. The program was assured funding through the end of fiscal year 2026, and the temporary cutback directives were formally replaced. Bill H.R. 5371, which Congress.gov records as having passed the Senate on November 10 and being signed as Public Law 119-3 on November 12, 2025, is the first pillar of stability. This law provides temporary appropriations for USDA and other agencies, including SNAP, through a point in FY 2026 and ends the government shutdown. Major news outlets, as reflected in your source list, report that the law guarantees SNAP funding through the end of September 2026. That means that unlike early November, when even the basic question, "Is there money to pay benefits?" was disputed between the administration and the states, from mid-November onward, that question was resolved at the budget level. Congress clearly stated that the program will continue to be financed. From an operational perspective, the November 13, 2025 FNS memorandum turns Congress's decision into a concrete payment schedule. The memo, SNAP Benefit Issuance and the Continuing Appropriations Act 2026, is described by FNS itself as the final update after a string of temporary instructions issued between October 10 and November 8. It links benefit issuance directly to the newly signed Appropriations Act and instructs state agencies to move quickly to ensure households receive their full November allotments under the new rules. In the same document, FNS makes clear that previous instructions about reducing obligations, delaying issuance, or limiting administrative costs for November are no longer in effect. In other words, as a matter of policy, from after November 13, the program returns to a full payment track and exits the patchwork guidance mode. What matters for the outlook in December is that none of the documents issued after November 13 contain any reference to continued cuts or delays for subsequent months. The November 4 and 5 memos only addressed reduced benefit obligations and administrative costs for November in the absence of full appropriations. The November 7 and 8 updates only adjusted how November benefits should be handled to comply with court orders. That entire chain was overwritten by the November 13 memo, and that memo itself focuses solely on restoring full November benefits. There is no indication in the listed documents that FNS plans to continue partial funding or postponements into December once the 2026 Appropriations Act has secured the funding. Associated Press stories from November 12 and 13 support that picture. The November 12th piece describes the gap between the reopening legislation being signed and benefits actually showing up on EBT cards, stressing that the timing was still unclear because of court rulings and uneven technical capacity across states. But in the November 13 story, after the new memo is out, AP describes states scrambling to send out the remaining November benefits after the shutdown ended. Roughly 2/3 of states had previously delayed or partially paid November benefits and now have to run supplemental issuances. That article does not mention any new cutback plan for December. It focuses on the job of catching up. Combined with the information that SNAP is funded through the end of September 2026, there is a solid basis to conclude that, in the eyes of mainstream news coverage, the storm ends in November and December onward rests on a much firmer foundation. Past experience helps confirm this pattern. The SNAP Benefit Issuance Memo of October 16, 2023, shows that when a continuing resolution is signed, FNS typically moves quickly to reassure states that benefits will be issued as normal through the period covered by that resolution. In 2023, even though the Continuing Appropriations Act 2024 technically funded the government only through mid-November, FNS confirmed that SNAP benefits would be paid through the end of December and instructed states to maintain their usual issuance schedules. Similarly, the October 4th memo on extending Stolen Benefit Replacement Authority explained that the Continuing Appropriations and Extensions Act 2025 allowed the program to operate through the end of January 2025 without changing existing plans. These two precedents point to a consistent pattern. When appropriations are clear, administrative guidance prioritizes stable issuance rather than repeating no-pay scenarios like those seen in November 2025. Applying that pattern to the post-November 13, 2025 context makes the December outlook much clearer. On the funding side, the 2026 Appropriations Act has locked in money for SNAP through the end of the fiscal year, well beyond December. On the policy side, FNS has issued a closing memo for November that directs states to restore full benefits and explicitly stops the temporary cutback measures. On the ground, according to AP, states are using the remainder of November to run catch-up payments, not to establish a new regime of half benefits. Taken together, the only reasonable conclusion from the available official and mainstream media sources is that December 2025 will be administered under a full benefit regime, with any remaining risks linked more to each state's processing capacity than to a lack of federal budget authority. However, saying stable doesn't mean every problem disappears overnight. SNAP benefit levels remain constrained by the broader macroeconomic context. High food prices mean that the average benefit of roughly $187 to $190 per person per month, cited by AP and NPR, is still under pressure. The federal budget faces competing priorities, so even though the 2026 Appropriations Act guarantees funding through the fiscal year, the way emergency reserves are used, like the $4.65 billion drawn for partial November funding, shows that the program continues to compete within the wider spending structure. The Congressional Research Service emphasized that despite SNAP being mandatory spending, its operations depend entirely on Congress's timing on appropriations bills and continuing resolutions. For specific beneficiary groups, the most important short-term takeaway is that December is not expected to repeat the zero-benefit scenario that October warnings had predicted. Low-income households, seniors, people with disabilities, families with children, and part-time workers can reasonably expect that after the government reopened and FNS issued new guidance, December SNAP benefits will arrive according to their state's posted schedule without the half-payment formulas that came from missing appropriations. If there are delays, they are more likely to stem from states working through the technical fallout from November rather than from Congress refusing to fund the program. For families who must stretch every dollar between rent, medicine, and groceries, the difference between "we don't know if any benefits are coming" and "we know benefits are coming, but they might be a few days late due to processing" is crucial for planning how to get through the month. From a public policy perspective, the larger question after November is whether the system will be changed to prevent SNAP from being pulled into future budget standoffs. The documents currently available do not answer that long-term question. But within the time window covered by the 2026 Appropriations Act and the November 13 memo, it's fair to say that after the November storm, SNAP's weather from December 2025 onward has been set to a relatively stable pattern. Families will still face high food prices and the uncertainties of the broader economy, but at least for the next 9 months, they no longer have to wake up wondering if this is the month their EBT card is suddenly empty because of a political budget fight in Washington.